The Jets play the Denver Broncos week 6 in London. We find out the dates and times of the other 16 games tonight. There are certain things Jets fans should be rooting for. We'll break them down today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Wednesday, May 14th, 2025, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. A big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets. We have new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday, and today our episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Well, today we're talking about the NFL schedule release. We will find out the dates and times of the Jets 2025 schedule. We're going to break down what you should be looking for and what you should not be looking for on today's show. Now, I know a lot of you are probably a little nervous as you tune into this podcast today. I'm sure that a lot of Jets fans are thinking, gee, is NFL Network only going to have a 2-hour, 45-minute special to break down the schedule release? Because that just doesn't seem sufficient. Well, I can put your mind at ease. NFL Network will be on for 3 hours tonight. 3 hours to break down the schedule on NFL Network. I frequently refer to this as a day that is overhyped. And every year when I say that, I get the same response. People say, well, you're talking about it. It's a story, of course. It's the biggest story for the New York Jets. It's the biggest story for the other 32 teams. I just don't know that we need a 3-hour special to break down the schedule release on top of a week's worth of hype where we're, going on national news programs to announce individual games. It is a big news story for the NFL. I don't think it deserves the hype of, say, the NFL draft, which is the way the league is trying to pump it up. I think that there's a happy medium to be found where you can cover it, but maybe 2 hours, 45 minutes is sufficient, because you have to remember, we know every matchup that's going to be played in the NFL in 2025. This is just about when and the dates and times of these games. Maybe NFL Network can tone it down a little bit next year. I doubt they will. But anyway, we actually do know the date and time of one Jets game. The Jets will play the Denver Broncos week 6 in London. That was part of the hype package of the early part of the week where the NFL announced in advance where the dates of the international game. So the Jets play the Denver Broncos. It will be week 6 in London, a 9:30 a.m. kickoff. This is a really interesting game for like some of the backstory with this. The Jets have a chance to kind of slay some demons, because you may remember last year there was really a 2-week stretch where the season started to go off the rails. Jets had an ugly week 1 loss in San Francisco, and then it kind of felt like they stabilized things in week 2 and week 3. They had a shaky win over the Tennessee Titans in week 2, but they did ultimately win the game. They had a comeback over a Titans team that really wasn't very good to even the record at 1-1. Then against New England the next week on Thursday Night Football, they dominated. And that was kind of like the high point of the Jets season, where they were 2-1 and they were actually like looking like a team that could make noise. What happened was a struggling Denver Broncos team came into the Meadowlands on a rainy day in week 4 and stole a game from the Jets, a game where the Jets really played very poorly. Then in week 5, the Jets went out to London for a game against the Minnesota Vikings. So the Jets essentially got run out of the building in the first half, tried to mount a second half comeback, but it fell short. And this was the point where, this was kind of like the no turning back point of the season, because this is where Woody Johnson started to put his stamp on the team. He fired Robert Saleh after that game, and then the Jets just started making crazy move after crazy move, trading for Devontae Adams a week later, giving Hassan Reddick a new contract. I mean, it was just like every week it felt like there was some miracle thought we were going to see season. And things really started to go off the rails in that week 4, week 5 period, where the Jets lost to the Denver Broncos, and then they lost in London to the Minnesota Vikings. So I doubt that's the reason the Jets were put in this London game against Denver. But there's a lot of symbolism in this game. Maybe the Jets can kind of conquer some of the demons from 2024 as they move forward in the 2025 season. Now, this is for the first time a Jets London game where they are the designated home team. The other 3 trips the Jets have made to London, in 2015 against the Miami Dolphins, in 2021 against the Atlanta Falcons and last year against the Minnesota Vikings, the opponent was designated the home team. So this is a Jets home game. Now, what does that mean? It doesn't really mean anything as far as the crowd goes. What it means is that the Jets have one less true home game this season. It means that there's one less game in the stadium. AFC teams get 9 home games in odd numbered years. Jets really only have 8 games at MetLife Stadium. One of those games is going to London. Jets have made like a big deal out of like the idea that they're the home team. They've pumped this idea up on social media, but it's not good for the fans. But that's the NFL. I mean, look, all 32 teams are going to lose a home game at some point because the league is really diving into like the international schedule. So that's just something, you have to deal with. If you're a season ticket holder, it's one less game you need to buy a ticket for, one less game you get to attend. This is a Jets home game in London. Now, I think as far as the schedule goes, we don't, at this point, we don't know what the Jets are going to lead into, what game the Jets are going to play week 5 before they go to London. But I think one thing worth watching is when the bye week falls. Will the Jets get a bye week 7 after this trip to London? And in the early stages of the NFL International Series, when teams went to the UK to play a game, they almost always got the bye week the next week. The week after you go to London is traditionally the week where you get your bye. That has not been true in recent years. The NFL kind of gives you the option. The NFL, at least in the past, has told teams, if you want the bye after you go to London, tell us. And then when the schedule comes out, the week after your London trip is a bye week. It'll be interesting to see whether the Jets choose that or not. I think there are arguments to be made either way. I mean, obviously, the international trip is a bit unusual. Having the bye week immediately after the London game is a chance to kind of like reset your team. I actually don't know that the travel's that big of a deal. I mean, I know you have to adjust your body clock, but I mean, people travel from the US to the UK all the time and are able to navigate it. And the Jets are traveling in luxury. So I don't know how essential it is, but I do think like there's a bit of a distraction element. There's a bit of leaving your comfort zone. Maybe it's good to like get back and have a week to kind of reset before you begin the rest of your schedule. On the other hand, I tend to be a believer that the later in the season your bye week comes, the better it is. Just because the NFL season's a very physical thing. You're taking a pounding week after week, and like NFL players will tell you by the time you get to like December, January, everybody's hurt. Everybody's playing through something because it just, months and months of taking those hits add up. And I do think that there's something to the idea that the later you get your bye week, if you can push your bye week into like November, or you benefit from the stretch run because it's a week where you don't take hits, a week to kind of recover and get as healthy as possible for the home stretch. It varies. Like there are some teams that actually benefit quite a bit from an early bye week. If you have like a lot of key players suffer minor injuries in the early part of the season, you can actually benefit from your bye week being earlier. So it obviously depends on a week to week basis, a team to team basis, and it depends on a lot of factors. But I think that if we're talking about like Jets Denver, the big storyline is the Jets trying to like redeem themselves after losses in Denver, and then the loss in London last year kind of derailed the season. But I think as far as the tangible aspects go, when the bye week falls, will it be week 7 after Denver? That's something to watch. And again, I think that there are arguments to be made in either direction. Now, head here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll get ready for the Jets schedule release. There's one thing everybody always looks for when the schedule comes out, and I don't think it's very valid. I don't think that the strength of schedule we're getting right now from news sites and sports sites is really all that significant. And it has a lot to do with the change in year to year in the NFL. We'll dive into that deeper as we continue here on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are in full swing, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's game-winning shots or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action. And FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. And if you're a Knicks fan, I mean, you're approaching a moment that's been 25 years in the making. Like Jets fans, you've been through a lot of really rough times over the last 2.5 decades. Well, the Knicks seem like they're winning big. You can win big on FanDuel, whether you're a Knicks fan, whether you root for some other team, whether you're just like a fan of the NBA in general and you don't have a favorite team. FanDuel's the best place to get in on the action. Are you new to FanDuel? It's the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. Again, make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the National Basketball Association. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. A big shout out to you everydayers. If you're new to the show, this is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. NFL Network is officially announcing the full schedule for 2025 tonight. It will be a 3-hour special with analysis. Again, I reiterate, we already know the teams that are playing. We already know the home teams in these games. So the only information that's new is we're getting the dates and times of these games. And apparently dates and times of these games require a 3-hour special on NFL Network. Not 2 hours, 50 minutes, not 2 hours, 45 minutes. NFL Network feels the need to be on for 3 hours to break down dates and times. It's a news story, and that's why we cover it, of course. But I think it's a news story that's frequently miscovered because I think a lot of the analysis goes about, what are the big games? And to be sure, like there are some intriguing matchups. For example, we know that the Jets will play the Pittsburgh Steelers in this coming season. And if you're looking at the situation, that's actually like a really intriguing storyline from the standpoint that these teams very well may have flipped quarterbacks. Justin Fields may not have been Pittsburgh starter through much of the season, but he was on the Steelers last year. He was their opening day starting quarterback. He started the first, third of the season before giving way to Russell Wilson. The Steelers wanted to bring him back, but the Jets were able to sign him. Pittsburgh may be going to that game with Aaron Rodgers, which, we'll see what happens there. I'm really happy to have that Rodgers drama behind us. And I have to be honest with you, I don't really have passionate feelings towards Aaron Rodgers. I think his Jets tenure was a complete failure. So there's no, we won't look back on him as a Jets legend, but that's an interesting storyline. I think where like a lot of this analysis fails though is people kind of project which teams are going to be good and which teams are going to be bad based on what happened last year. Now, I think we can guess as long as Buffalo doesn't suffer an injury to Josh Allen, they're going to be pretty good. I think there are other teams there, on the Jets schedule. Baltimore. Again, I think Baltimore, we can probably surmise that the Ravens are going to be pretty good. Cincinnati, that's going to be a tough game, as long as Joe Burrow is healthy because they have a dynamic offense. Will they be able to figure out their issues on the defensive side of the ball? We'll find out. But whenever you're going up against an offense like that, they're kind of dangerous. I think we know as long as there's no injuries, there's not going to be an easy game. But you look at the rest of the schedule, and this is the key point here, is that you're going to see you're going to see how tough each team's schedule is. It's going to be based on last year's winning percentages. But the thing is, things change a lot from year to year in the NFL. I mean, teams have had full offseason. Teams have been able to sign players in free agency. Teams have been able to draft new players. And there's a lot of just random luck that determines sometimes whether you have a successful season or not. Not so much for the teams that win 12 games. If you're a 12-win team, odds are you're pretty good. But the difference between 6 wins, a 6-11 season, and 10 wins, a 10-7 season, it's not that much. Around half the games in the league are decided by one score or less. And you think about what goes into one-score games. It's not, sometimes it's just a lucky bounce. Sometimes it's fortune that, not about anything your team did right or wrong. Sometimes, a receiver slips on a route and a pass turns into an interception as a result. Sometimes a bad call swings a game. I think Jets fans can relate to that. Sometimes a ball's loose on the ground, a fumble, and the way it bounces determines who gets a key recovery. So, when you look at when you hear it tonight that, this team has the easiest schedule in the league. Well, that's based on last year's results. And we know that sometimes teams that were good last year aren't good this year. And sometimes teams that were bad last year are good this year. Some of the teams, I give you an example. New England, who was one of the worst teams in the league last year, they may be better this year. I think they'll have better coaching with Mike Vrabel instead of Gerard Mayo. I think Gerard Mayo proved that he was not ready to be an NFL head coach. Maybe he will be someday. But the Patriots pretty much told us they made a mistake by firing him after 1 year. So Mike Vrabel, is a quality coach. Drake May entering year 2. They've made a couple of additions to upgrade their talent level. New England's not going to be the worst team in the league, but if you look at like last year's strength of schedule, you'll say that's an easy game. That's obviously not necessarily the case. Another example, one I feel less passionately about, but Jacksonville. The Jaguars were awful last year. Their season kind of went off the rails. It was a season that was not entirely dissimilar to the one the Jets had in 2024, because it was just like one of those seasons where things went completely off the rails. And I think the Jaguars, at least talent-wise, were better than their record suggested. And I remember the Jets played there in December. The Jets beat them. It was it speaks volumes that was one of the 5 Jets wins in 2024. You just saw a team that couldn't execute anything on a basic level. And I think that the odds are Jacksonville, I don't know how good they're going to be, but the odds are that Jacksonville is going to be better this year, just because they can't really be. It would be difficult to be as dysfunctional as they were a year ago. So all of this is to say that we have some sense of who's going to be good. Again, Buffalo probably going to be good. Baltimore probably going to be good. Cincinnati, they're going to be a tough out. The Pittsburgh game is admittedly intriguing just from the storyline, because you could have the teams with the quarterbacks that flipped. But how's Miami going to be? I think I don't really have a good sense for how good the Miami Dolphins are going to be. Atlanta's a wild card. Jets have the Falcons at home this year. Michael Penix Jr., how he performs will tell us a lot about that. Carolina, we're not expecting them to be good, but with Bryce Young at quarterback, if Bryce Young takes an unexpected step, they could be good. And you don't know who's going to suffer injuries, because an injury can drastically change your season. So, all of this analysis, who are the easy games, who are the tough games, we only have a vague sense. And then even then, we don't really know, because if you've listened to my episodes where I've done these schedule breakdowns through the years, there was 1 year where I said, we know Seattle's probably not going to be good. Seattle ended up making the playoffs that year. That was the first year Geno Smith took over as quarterback, and nobody was expecting Geno to have a good year, and he ends up having a very good year, and Seattle makes the playoffs. Last year when we did the schedule release, Minnesota seemed like a pretty compelling team to get early in the season, because we thought they'd have J.J. McCarthy at quarterback. If you get rookie quarterbacks early, that's better than getting them late, because they're still kind of acclimating themselves to the NFL. What happened? Obviously, McCarthy got injured. Sam Darnold came in, and they went 14-3. They ended up being a very tough opponent. I remember saying it's a good thing the Jets got Minnesota week 5. Ended up being kind of the end of the Jets season, because that was the game in London that led to Woody Johnson taking control. And when Woody Johnson takes control, bad things happen. So I think that a lot of the analysis that will come out tonight misses the mark. Here on the Locked On Jets podcast, let's talk about what we should actually be looking for. I do think that there are some key elements to the schedule that could be beneficial or could hurt the Jets. We'll discuss what those elements are, and it's not about strength of schedule. We'll go deeper into it continuing here on this Wednesday edition of Locked On Jets. This is the Locked On Jets podcast on this Wednesday, getting ready for the NFL schedule release, 8 o'clock on NFL Network. And, if you are a couple hours late, don't worry. The show will go on for 3 hours tonight, breaking down the 2025 NFL regular season schedule. We now know one of the 17 Jets games. The league announced on Tuesday that the Jets will play the Denver Broncos in London week 6. The other 16 games and the bye week will be filled in after that. So let's figure out what actually matters in the Jets schedule. Because again, I think that a lot of the schedule analysis is inaccurate. So what are the things we actually should be looking for? I have a couple of them. I mentioned one of them earlier. I think generally speaking, a later buy is better than an earlier buy. It's not always the case. In 2015, that was the Jets' first trip to London. The Jets had a good season, and part of the reason they had a good season was they had an early bye. They played week 4 in London that year against the Miami Dolphins, and they had a week 5 bye. And that ended up being very timely, because the Jets had guys, key players on their team, Eric Decker, Chris Ivory, who were banged up in the early part of the season. Not seriously, nothing that a week of rest could not fix. And a week of rest did fix it for that team. So that Jets team was very fortunate to play London early in the season because they got the bye right after the London game. They were able to heal up, and they ended up winning 10 games. The only time the Jets have had a winning record since 2011. And I think part of that was due to the early bye. But generally speaking, I think you're better off having a later bye because just like it gets you as fresher for the home stretch. And that's important. I don't think the Jets are going to have many primetime games. The last couple of years when Aaron Rodgers was on the team, obviously he ended up not being on the team much in 2023, but when the schedule came out, we thought he'd be the starting quarterback through much of the season. 2023, 2024, Jets had a lot of primetime games. That's not very likely this year. And I have to tell you, like, as a podcast host, I don't like primetime games. So this is really selfish and the reason for that is, I have to do like a post-game show after it. And it's much easier to do a post-game show after a 1 o'clock game than it is after a primetime game because primetime games, don't end until around midnight. So I have to stay up pretty late to record. That's not really a big consideration, though, in the grand scheme of things. Like if the Jets win, I'll gladly stay up late. I think, Joe, though, for regular fans, if you like going to a game, even if you like just sitting on your couch watching at home, football's really meant to be watched at 1 o'clock Sunday afternoon. So I feel like that's one of the benefits of being a team with lower expectations, that you're not going to have as many primetime games. You don't have to wait all day for football. You can kick off your day by watching the Jets, and then hopefully they win and you move on to other games. But to the extent the Jets have primetime games, there are always a couple of things that I look for. Number one, you want to avoid road trips after Monday night games. The reason for that is pretty simple, is that when you play Monday night, you have one less game to prepare. You have one less day to prepare for your next opponent. Maybe even 2 less days, because you play Monday night, Tuesday is kind of a wash. So you have a much shorter week to prepare. You have to essentially have to condense your preparation into a much shorter time frame. You don't want to add to that by having a road trip after a Monday night game. So I think that's a critical component. You're almost certainly going to get a Thursday night game somewhere along the way. I mean, that's just the way Thursday night football works. It's pretty much a mechanism to get even the worst team at least one primetime game. You want to avoid the Thursday night game being on the road. And, kind of similar to what I was mentioning with the Monday night games, where Thursday night's an even more compressed schedule. You finish Sunday, and then you have to get ready in 3 days for your next opponent. You can barely prepare anyway. I mean, I always laugh at when people criticize a game plan on Thursday night football. There is no game plan for Thursday night football. I mean, you're pretty much just like you can't even really practice. You can't really prepare anything because the time between games is so short. You don't want to compound that by having to spend a day traveling. I mean, when you travel, you really don't have any time to prepare for the game. So you'd prefer to have your Thursday night football game at home when you play. You're definitely going to play at least one Thursday night game. Last year, the Jets got 2. But they were both at home and they won both games. They beat New England week 3. They beat the Texans on Halloween night, which shows you a really bad Jets team that won only 3 games otherwise was 2-0 on Thursday night football. And one of those wins was against a division champion. So it shows you the kind of the benefit of playing Thursday night at home, because you at least can get a practice or 2 in if you play at home. You're playing on the road. You're spending a day traveling on top when you only have 3 days to get ready. So you want to play at home on Thursday. I am skeptical, as I mentioned in the last segment, I am skeptical at the idea that, you can definitively determine which games are easy and which games are hard. I mean, there's so much that changes from year to year. Even teams that were expecting to be good could have their season derailed by injuries. We've seen that before. A big injury early in the season really impacts your team. But again, there are certain teams that we know are probably going to be tough. Your Buffaloes, your Cincinnatis, your Baltimores. I think for a team like the Jets, you'd like to avoid having those games early. From the standpoint, this Jets team is kind of new coaching staff, a lot of new faces on the team, not high expectations. I think there's something to be said for the idea that you'd like some of the relatively easier games to be front loaded, because I do think confidence can play a role in the NFL. Particularly when you have what's essentially a new team working together and a new coaching staff. You get off on a good note. You get on a little bit of a roll. You can build confidence. And sometimes teams get on a roll early in the season. They punch above their weight class the full season. So I think that's something that you'd like to see for the Jets. I think you'd like to avoid those early games, because you also have the possibility that, if you get these teams later in the season that we're expecting to be good, Baltimore, Cincinnati, Buffalo, maybe something's going wrong for them. it probably will not have gone wrong for them the first couple weeks of the season, but maybe get later into the season, they're just not having the type of year they thought they'd be having, and the game ends up being easier than it would have been in the first couple of weeks. So these are the things I'm looking for when the Jets schedule comes out. I don't think the analysis on strength of schedule from their 2024 records is really all that meaningful. And we already know the 17 Jets opponents. And by the way, there's a formula that gives the Jets these opponents, because every year, like, people act like the league is out to screw the Jets by giving them the opponents that they got. There's actually like a pretty simple formula for figuring out which opponents the Jets will play. But I think, like, on the margins, this day can make a difference, because I do think that there are certain areas where a schedule can give you an advantage, and other areas where maybe it's, if the schedule makers aren't kind to you, they give you a disadvantage. We'll see what happens tonight on our 3-hour NFL Network schedule. That's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your Wednesday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow to talk when we know what the Jets 2025 schedule looks like.